The date was November 12, 1945. At precisely 18:15 hours, on Harrison Farm in Herefordshire, England, the psychological landscape of the war shifted for 3 German prisoners. Untitled K. Schmidt stood rigid in the farmhouse doorway, his military cap clutched in his hands, paralyzed by uncertainty over whether to cross the threshold. Behind him, his companions, Heinrich Weber and Franz Dietrich, remained equally frozen in the twilight. Peering past the threshold, they witnessed a scene of impossible domesticity. The Harrison family's dining table, immaculately set for 8, with steam gently curling upward from the serving dishes. William Harrison, the farmer who had overseen their agricultural labor for the past 4 months, broke the silence. He gestured toward the laden table, urging them forward. "Food's getting cold. My wife's made lamb stew, and there's bread fresh from the oven. Don't stand about in the doorway." Schmidt exchanged wary glances with his companions. The explicit Nazi propaganda of the preceding years had painted a stark picture. British families harbored an intense hatred for German soldiers, precluding any human interaction beyond the necessary supervision of manual labor. This spontaneous invitation to a family dinner, treating them as neighbors rather than enemy prisoners of war, shattered that carefully constructed reality. Margaret Harrison materialized from the kitchen, balancing another serving dish. She offered a genuine, disarming smile to the hesitant German men. "Don't be shy, lads. Plenty for everyone," she assured them. "William tells me you've been working hard on the north fence. The least we can do is feed you properly." Carl Schmidt finally stepped across the threshold, his throat constricted by emotion. The last time he had been seated at a family dinner table was Christmas 1941 in Munich, before his conscription, before the devastating losses at Stalingrad, and before his eventual capture and transport to England, where Carl had braced himself for the expected brutality, yet he was met instead with a firm, confusing fairness that immediately shattered every assumption the Reich had carefully taught him. He took the seat Margaret indicated. Heinrich and Franz followed, their movements unnaturally cautious, as if afraid that any sudden motion might shatter the fragile illusion of peace. Harrison's 3 children, 2 daughters aged 12 and 8, and a 15-year-old son, observed the German soldiers not with the anticipated hatred, but with open curiosity. The older daughter offered bread without hesitation. The younger asked, in careful, practiced English, if they had an appreciation for lamb. Margaret then ladled thick stew into Carl's bowl. The aroma was overwhelming: genuine meat, fresh vegetables, and herbs, actual food prepared with care, not the institutionalized rations heated in a field mess tin. His hands trembled as he raised the spoon. The first taste struck him with physical force. The warmth, the flavor, the simple, profound comfort of home cooking he had not experienced in 4 long years. Overwhelmed by the sudden return of humanity, he lowered his spoon, covered his face, and wept openly. This deeply human moment was the unexpected byproduct of a vast, calculated national arrangement. By late 1945, Britain found itself holding over 400,000 German prisoners awaiting eventual repatriation. Germany, utterly shattered, lacked the infrastructure to receive this influx quickly. Simultaneously, Britain faced a critical post-war labor crisis. Millions of men remained in uniform overseas. Agriculture, in particular, was crippled. Farms could not function without the hands required to harvest crops, maintain vital equipment, and perform the essential daily labor. The pragmatic solution devised was the systematic assignment of German prisoners to agricultural work under the direct supervision of civilian farmers. The prisoners would supply the desperately needed labor, while the farmers were tasked with their management and ensuring productivity. The immediate necessity of post-war reconstruction dictated that work assignments be completed competently, with any operational problems reported through official channels. While everyone understood that the arrangement was fundamentally temporary, pending eventual repatriation, the simultaneous demand for labor on British farms and the need for productive activity among the captive population necessitated the program's immediate implementation. It operated under meticulously clear guidelines. Prisoners worked standard 8-hour days performing essential agricultural tasks, receiving wages that were credited to accounts for their eventual return home. They were housed either in dedicated camps or converted facilities situated near the farms where they labored. Although guards initially accompanied the work parties, this supervision gradually relaxed as the prisoners consistently proved their reliability and diligence. This was not merely token employment. The work was real, necessary, and constituted genuine agricultural labor that was vital to keeping British farms operational during the immediate post-war era. What the official guidelines failed to anticipate, however, was the profound evolution of relationships that daily work would inevitably foster, transcending the sterile prisoner-supervisor dynamic. For months, farmers and their assigned workforce labored side by side, confronting shared challenges: broken equipment, inclement weather, and the difficult tasks that demanded genuine cooperation. This sustained interaction created a context that extended far beyond the minimal communication required to complete a job. Consider William Harrison, who received 3 German prisoners assigned to his substantial 200-acre farm in July 1945. Harrison desperately needed the hands. The acreage demanded more labor than his family could provide, a shortage made acutely painful by the loss of his oldest son killed at Cong. Initially, the Germans represented only a pragmatic solution to a critical labor deficit, nothing more. But 4 months of arduous daily work had irrevocably altered this perception, transforming them from anonymous enemy combatants into individuals he knew and relied upon. Karl, for instance, who had initially been referred to only as Clark before. Karl, Hinrich, the former teacher, and Franz, the apprentice carpenter, all conscripted into the conflict, now found their lives dictated by the monotonous rhythm of captivity. Their mornings began with the obligatory roll call at the main prisoner camp, followed by transport to assigned agricultural sites. Arriving at Harrison Farm typically around 7 a.m., the 3 men would receive the day's assignments, laboring until the 4 p.m. cessation, punctuated only by a break for the midday meal. The work was demanding and varied, critical to the farm's operation, repairing essential boundary fences, harvesting the last stubborn remnants of autumn crops, preparing the vast fields for the coming winter freeze, and the continuous maintenance of equipment and feeding of livestock. Harrison, the farmer, maintained supervision, yet crucially, he worked alongside them. His approach was professional and pragmatic. He would demonstrate the necessary agricultural tasks, expecting competent execution, and correcting mistakes swiftly but without any overt hostility. He was neither a confidant nor a cruel overseer, but rather a farmer demanding reasonable effort while instructing his workforce on proper technique. The initial weeks were defined by profound awkwardness. The prisoners possessed only minimal English proficiency, and Harrison spoke no German. Communication, therefore, became a complex ballet of gestures, physical demonstrations, and the gradual urgent acquisition of essential field vocabulary. Simple, practical words, *fence*, *hammer*, *careful*, good work*, formed a rudimentary, shared lexicon that slowly began to bridge the immense gap separating employer from enemy combatant. This tentative truce was cemented by accumulated small gestures of consideration. Harrison would consistently provide hot tea in tin cups during the morning break, a small act that nonetheless acknowledged the prisoners as men deserving of basic comfort during the chill. His wife, Margaret, often sent additional sandwiches for the midday meal, anticipating afternoons of particularly heavy labor. The farm children, meanwhile, remained fascinated spectators, watching. The prisoners approached their labor with professional curiosity, noting that their German captors, contrary to propaganda, appeared surprisingly ordinary. Despite the circumstances, the men proved highly competent. Karl, who had never farmed before conscription, demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for learning, while Hinrich's rural upbringing meant he understood agricultural tasks instinctively. Franz's specific carpentry skills proved invaluable for necessary repairs around the property. They worked steadily and without complaint, grateful for outdoor labor that, while demanding, lacked the deliberate cruelty often associated with the German labor camps. Harrison quickly recognized their competence, steadily increasing his trust and assigning them complex tasks. By October, the relationship had fundamentally shifted. The prisoners operated with minimal supervision, independently managing equipment repair, overseeing livestock care, and making critical decisions about daily task priorities. The dynamic had evolved from weary supervision to a functional, if unusual, form of teamwork. This fragile arrangement was tested in November. The invitation to dinner came after a particularly punishing day when a powerful mid-morning storm made outdoor work impossible. Heavy rain, driven by winds that made standing upright difficult, forced Harrison to call off work and send the prisoners to the barn. Hours passed. Cold and wet despite the shelter, they waited, expecting eventual transport back to the primary camp. As late afternoon arrived, the storm showed no sign of breaking. Transport was clearly impossible, meaning the prisoners faced a night confined to the barn, lacking adequate heating and a proper evening meal. Harrison, observing the dismal scene from his kitchen window, made a decision that required no further deliberation. He walked immediately toward the barn, where the prisoners stood to attention upon his entry, anticipating a command. The planned movement of the prisoners was abruptly halted. Harrison, dismissing the practicalities of transport, declared simply, "The storm is not breaking. You will remain here tonight. But first, you will come up to the house for dinner. My wife, Margaret, has prepared a hearty stew, and there is no reason for you to sit out here in the biting cold." The German prisoners stared back, comprehending the gravity of the invitation. Karl, finding his limited English, managed the incredulous question, "You want we come dinner? To your house?" Harrison confirmed the unprecedented offer. "That is precisely what I said. The food is ready. My family is waiting. Come on." The short walk from the utilitarian barn to the warmth of the farmhouse was a profoundly surreal experience for the men. They were not entering as laborers or captives, but as invited guests into a British home, a scenario that utterly contradicted every wartime lesson they had internalized regarding British antagonism. The dinner itself became a powerful symbol of normalized humanity. Margaret Harrison had set the table with the care she would afford any visiting company. Proper porcelain plates replaced institutional mess tins, and serving dishes were passed around the table, contrasting sharply with the customary distribution of rations. The meal was fundamentally home cooking, rich lamb stew with vegetables, fresh bread accompanied by butter, and hot tea served in actual cups. Nothing about the spread was elaborate, yet every detail signaled that the prisoners were being afforded the dignity of human guests rather than faceless enemy combatants. The Harrison children engaged with a mixture of instilled politeness and genuine curiosity. The older daughter, Sarah, carefully posed questions in measured English, deliberately avoiding the subject of the conflict. Instead, she inquired about ordinary German life. Did they have farms like this? What did German bread truly taste like? These innocent queries treated the soldiers not as the embodiment of an enemy nation, but as individuals with homes and personal histories. Young Emma offered a piece of bread to the prisoner known as France with a shy, tentative smile. France accepted the offering with extreme caution, handling the simple gesture as if its fragile significance might shatter under rough contact. Having been conscripted at the age of 19, the German soldier had witnessed horrors on the Russian front that seemed to age him decades beyond his years. The unexpected simplicity of the child's kindness struck him with an emotional force he was utterly incapable of processing. He offered a silent nod of thanks, his voice failing him. Nearby, Harrison's son, Thomas, sat in quiet observation. He was only 14, yet the shadow of war had already touched him profoundly. His older brother had been killed by concentrated German defensive fire during the brutal Normandy campaign. As he watched the German prisoners consume the meal at his family's table, Thomas wrestled with the agonizing realization that these men might have served in the very units responsible for his brother's death, triggering complicated emotions he could not yet articulate. His father, recognizing this internal struggle, offered no immediate comment, allowing his son the privacy to navigate these complex feelings. The subsequent conversation was halting but unmistakably genuine. Harrison inquired about their respective families back in Germany. Karl detailed the plight of his daughter in Bremen, a child he had not seen in 4 years, whose home had been eradicated by the unrelenting Allied bombing campaigns. Hinrich spoke of his wife, a schoolteacher struggling to survive in the ravaged streets of Hamburg. Franz reported that his parents in Bavaria, while residing in a rural area that had escaped the worst physical destruction, were facing imminent starvation due to failed harvests and the complete disruption of food distribution networks. Margaret listened with quiet, profound sympathy. Her own family had suffered. Her brother had been killed fighting in North Africa, and she had lost friends during the relentless bombing of the Blitz. Yet, the German prisoners seated at her table were no longer abstract enemies. They were tangible men with suffering families, conscripted and thrust into a global conflict they had never chosen. At a moment of shared reflection, Harrison carefully mentioned his oldest son. The entire table fell into a heavy silence. Karl looked directly at Harrison and stated quietly in deliberate, careful English, "I am. War took many sons. Mine also, my brother Stalingrad." The simple, raw declaration that his brother was lost at 21 on the brutal Eastern Front caused Harrison to nod slowly in recognition. For a fleeting moment, the rigid lines of nationality, political ideology, and wartime allegiance dissolved. What remained was a shared, visceral understanding of profound loss, a human connection forged in the mutual experience of families forever incomplete. The meal continued in a subdued atmosphere, the psychological barriers between captor and captive irrevocably shattered. They were no longer merely British and Germans, victor and vanquished, but human beings acknowledging a common humanity that the industrial scale of conflict had attempted, yet failed, to extinguish. Karl's psychological defenses were built on 4 years of unrelenting exposure to death in Russia, where Wehrmacht casualties sometimes approached 70%. He had survived the brutal retreat through Poland, witnessing firsthand the lack of mercy shown by Soviet forces toward captured Germans. Transported to England, he arrived expecting the British brutality promised by unrelenting Nazi propaganda. His survival had relied on a deep-seated psychological numbness, a mechanism allowing him to function amidst continuous, existential horror. Yet, his experience in British captivity had presented the first profound contradiction to the Third Reich's warnings. The rations were adequate, the housing bearable, the guards firm but seldom cruel, and work assignments, while real labor, were not deliberately punitive. This objective reality contradicted every Nazi warning about the fate of the captured soldier. Despite this evidence, Karl had maintained a deep psychological defensiveness, perpetually awaiting the calculated cruelty that never materialized. The simple, domestic gesture of the dinner invitation shattered these remaining defenses entirely. This was clearly not minimal compliance with the Geneva Conventions, nor was it a cold, calculated policy designed to extract cooperation. This was a British family inviting an enemy soldier to share their table. The British family extended an unprecedented invitation, asking the defeated soldiers to share their hearth, serving them home-cooked food, treating them not as enemies but as honored guests deserving of fundamental human courtesy. This act of kindness was fundamentally incomprehensible within the rigid Nazi ideological framework, which had relentlessly portrayed the British as decadent, weak enemies, wholly incapable of genuine civilization. Karl's sudden, overwhelming weeping was not merely a reaction to the meal, though the first authentic home cooking in 4 years certainly contributed to the physical relief. He was processing the catastrophic collision between years of indoctrinated propaganda and the immediate, undeniable reality, between the expectation of hatred and the direct experience of profound compassion. The chasm between his identity as an enemy prisoner and his treatment as a fellow human being became unbearable. This accumulated weight of contradiction reached its peak at the family dinner table, where a child innocently offered him bread with a smile. Margaret placed a hand gently on his shoulder, uttering the simple, definitive reassurance, "It's all right, lad. Eat. You're safe here." That declaration of safety, coming from a woman whose nation he had fought against, spoken while her husband, a man who had himself lost sons to the conflict, sat across the table, represented everything the Nazi ideology could neither explain nor counter. The British were not demonstrating weakness by extending compassion to defeated enemies. Instead, they were demonstrating the resilience of a civilization that Nazism had attempted, but ultimately failed, to destroy. Genuine civilization survived even total war. The integration of the prisoners into the household, symbolized by that shared dinner, became the precedent for continued interaction that quickly evolved beyond a simple employer-worker relationship. Though the emotional storm passed overnight and the prisoners returned to work the next day, something fundamental had irrevocably shifted. They had been guests in a British home, shared a family meal, and been granted a dignity that could not be retracted or forgotten. The strict hierarchy of the camp system quickly dissolved into a dynamic defined by collaboration and mutual respect, entirely supplanting the minimal interaction required by wartime mandate. Harrison initiated a crucial departure from protocol, regularly inviting the prisoners for supper whenever the demanding schedule of farm work extended late or inclement weather compromised transport. Margaret, without ceremony, integrated them into the rhythm of the farm household, setting extra places and treating the workers as a natural extension of the family table. The children, exhibiting the innocent curiosity of youth, quickly grew accustomed to the Germans' presence, engaging them with questions about their homeland and teaching them English phrases, thus incorporating them into domestic life. The prisoners responded not merely with compliance, but with heightened initiative and demonstrably competent labor, a silent expression of gratitude that transcended the language barrier. They began repairing equipment far beyond their assigned tasks, working extended hours during the critical harvest periods, and undertaking projects that benefited the farm without specific instruction. This reciprocal relationship demonstrated that appreciation was expressed through action, proving they understood the kindness extended and sought to repay it. This arrangement was soon observed by neighboring properties, and the sight of German prisoners eating at British family tables ceased to be remarkable in many rural communities. While the practice was certainly not universal, some families remained unable to overcome the deep-seated grief and anger of the war years. Many others discovered that treating the prisoners as individuals rather than abstract enemies fostered superior working relationships and often blossomed into genuine friendships. By early 1946, British newspapers frequently published striking images documenting the surprising integration of German prisoners of war into the fabric of rural life. Vignettes showing them working alongside British farmers, occasionally seated at family tables, or even participating in local village events. These pictures immediately sparked a vigorous public debate. Some readers vehemently condemned this perceived fraternization with former enemies, while others praised the inherent British capacity for demonstrating mercy toward defeated foes. Most citizens, however, adopted a pragmatic perspective, recognizing that rural families were making practical, immediate decisions about managing the essential labor assigned to their supervision, having quickly ascertained that decency and kindness produced dramatically better outcomes than hostility. This unusual domestic equilibrium was abruptly halted by the reality of repatriation. When notification arrived that the prisoners would be returned to Germany, the parting proved far more emotionally complex than anyone had anticipated. Karl, Heinrich, and Franz had toiled at Harrison Farm for 7 months by the time the official repatriation orders were issued in February. 7 months of shared daily work, occasional family dinners, and accumulated interactions had fundamentally transformed them from anonymous prisoners into known individuals in the eyes of the Harrisons. The notification that they would be transported back to Germany within days created unexpected emotional complexity for all involved. The prisoners felt the profound relief of potential reunification with families, the return to their homeland, and the chance to resume interrupted lives. Yet, this was tempered by a sincere gratitude, bordering on genuine affection, for the Harrisons, whose consistent decency utterly contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught them about the British character. Departure felt akin to abandoning people who had shown them unexpected kindness during their lowest period. The Harrisons experienced similar complexity. The prisoners had become essential workers whose sustained labor kept the farm productive. Replacing the German prisoners posed a significant logistical challenge to keeping the farm operational, but the greater difficulty lay in the emotional severance. Over months, these individuals had transitioned from enemy combatants to familiar presences, men whose personalities the family knew, whose quiet histories they had absorbed. Sending them back to a Germany now largely destroyed, though administratively necessary, felt profoundly wrong. The final dinner occurred the evening before their mandated departure. Margaret prepared a special, almost symbolic meal, utilizing hoarded rations to present a proper roast with vegetables and a dessert crafted from saved preserves. The conversation at the table was subdued, weighted by the knowledge that this was their permanent farewell. Karl, struggling to articulate the depth of his feelings in English that remained halting despite months of daily use, managed a profound expression of gratitude. "You give us humanity. We thought British hate us. You show kindness. We do not forget." Harrison's response was characteristically understated, focusing on pragmatism. "You earned it through honest work and decent behavior. That's all we ask of anyone." Margaret, however, offered a more tangible farewell, preparing individual packages containing bread, cheese, and some dried meat, small comforts intended for the long and likely difficult journey back to the continent. This gesture was intensely maternal, transcending nationality or former enmity. Having fed these men for months and acknowledged their inherent humanity, sending them away empty-handed was simply unthinkable. The scene culminated with Thomas, Harrison's son, shaking hands formally with each prisoner, a difficult gesture that acknowledged the complicated emotions he had navigated over 7 months. These specific men had not been responsible for his brother's death, yet they had served the regime that was. The simple handshake crystallized an acceptance of moral complexity, acknowledging that the prisoners had suffered losses mirroring those endured by the Harrison family. Reducing the relationship to mere wartime hatred was impossible. The departure came swiftly. At dawn, The transport truck arrived. The prisoners loaded their few salvaged possessions, exchanging final, quiet goodbyes before departing toward the regional processing center that would organize their repatriation to Germany. As the vehicle pulled away, Carl looked back at Harrison Farm. He observed the farmhouse where he had been treated less as a captive and more as a guest, the fields that had demanded his labor, and the family that had extended a profound kindness for which he could never fully articulate his gratitude. The farm soon disappeared behind the rolling hills. Wrapped carefully within his pack was the loaf of bread Margaret had baked. Beside it lay a small photograph. The Harrisons had insisted on taking a picture of the 3 German prisoners standing alongside the family. The resulting image captured a British family and their former enemies, smiling together, a powerful, simple act asserting humanity over the conclusion of war. The arduous journey back to Germany consumed weeks. The bread lasted 3 days, but the photograph would endure a lifetime. Carl would eventually place the image on his mantelpiece in his rebuilt Bremen apartment, showing it to his daughter when she inquired about his time in England. He recounted the rigorous farm work, the shared dinners at their table, and the quiet, persistent kindness that had utterly contradicted Nazi propaganda, teaching him the genuine meaning of civilization. 1 year after that initial, tentative dinner, in November 1946, the Harrison family gathered for their evening meal at the same table where the German prisoners had once sat. The chairs, once occupied by wartime necessity, now accommodated the family alone. The German prisoners had returned to their homeland, and new workers had not yet been assigned. The daily rhythm of the farm relied solely on family labor, augmented only by necessary seasonal help. Yet, the memory of their presence lingered powerfully. Margaret, setting the table, still vividly recalled the German prisoners who had sat precisely where her daughters now occupied the seats, men who had wept openly at the simple, unexpected kindness of a home-cooked meal. Thomas had gradually navigated the complex emotional terrain of having enemies at the family hearth, understanding ultimately that carrying perpetual hatred was not the legacy his brother would have desired. The daughters, recalling the Germans who had worked alongside them, occasionally asked what had become of their temporary companions. William, looking across the ordinary wooden surface, reflected deeply upon Carl's letter. He considered the profound transformation of these men, arriving as defeated prisoners and departing as something genuinely approaching friends, a powerful testament to the value of kindness, a negligible expenditure that had meant everything to men who had expected only harsh brutality. This extraordinary experience reinforced the convictions he had held before the conflict, convictions tested rigorously by the crucible of war, that treating all individuals with dignity was a moral imperative, irrespective of political alignment, and that fairness invariably produced better outcomes than cruelty. Civilization, he believed, meant maintaining these standards even toward defeated enemies. The table, scarred by decades of domestic use, was unremarkable save for its profound history. It had become the silent witness to a fundamental shift, a site where former enemies were recognized as fellow humans, and where a British family had demonstrated the resilience of civilization, proving through the simple, shared act of a meal that hatred was not the inevitable, defining outcome of armed conflict. Years later, historians would extensively document the British treatment of German POWs, analyzing these policies and their resultant outcomes. The official record often chronicled success through quantifiable metrics, cooperation indices, post-war assimilation statistics, and documented policies demonstrating systematic fairness. These calculated approaches were designed to strategically balance national security requirements with the imperative of decent treatment, reflecting long-term thinking about the profound societal consequences of managing a defeated enemy population. Yet, the true measure of reconciliation resided not in the archives, but in moments of profound, unscripted humanity. It was the sight of German prisoners weeping openly at a shared family dinner table, the quiet decision of British families to extend genuine hospitality to men who had recently been military adversaries, and the cumulative weight of small kindnesses that effectively dismantled wartime propaganda and rebuilt fundamental human connection across vast political divisions. The Harrisons' table, in this context, became a vital microcosm of that larger, essential narrative. This was one family among thousands who chose compassion over enduring hatred, proving that civilization persisted through actions that were individually minor but cumulatively transformative. As the meal commenced and the family ate together, the conversation was strikingly ordinary. Mundane concerns of farm labor, children's activities, and planning for tomorrow's routine. Nothing about the scene was dramatic or historically monumental. It was simply a family dinner at a worn wooden table that had once afforded enemy prisoners unexpected dignity that would resonate for lifetimes. When the family finished, the table remained, a silent witness to a quiet, enduring truth. Humanity's most significant victories are occasionally won not on the muddy battlefields of conflict, but around the simple act of breaking bread, where former combatants are offered dignity that the machinery of war could never truly extinguish.